not familiar with the after effects of this art. Simply put, for every person brought back from death, another of his race shall die untimely. This spell is tantamount to murder, therefore it is treated as such. Necromancy is literally death magic. It can be used to draw back the spirit of the dead and force it to inhabit the body it has rightfully vacated. This does not bring the dead back to life. Indeed, the body loses its ability to feel and heal its wounds. Eventually, even the best-kept corpse will be useless. Countless accidents and daily wear will eventually exhaust its potential, and the spirit never quite grasps what has happened. It exists in a state of constant confusion. In its own mind, it is reliving its past. It replays events that it has experienced, despite different environments and the lack of other players and props. Some lose contact with this world entirely and live only in the created reality of the past, but that is an extreme case. Most spirits can understand and communicate with the living. This is their only benefit. Resurrected corpses obey the living as well as they can, given their mental and physical limitations. In a situation where the living cannot function, at peril to life or health, a corpse can perform admirably. Necromancy was discovered by accident. A failed experiment to uncover the soul's destination after death unexpectedly provided the basis for resurrection. No one understands precisely what the spell does. The spell's results are understood, but where are we drawing the spirit from? What are we consigning it to? Why does another person have to die, and why only from the same race? These questions will have to remain unanswered, as all experiments involving the spell have been prohibited. The spell itself is as follows. Pretty simple. This text should serve only to remind that the practice of necromancy has been condemned. By forgetting the art and its consequences, we risk that future generations will unwittingly follow our footsteps, rediscover the discipline, and repeat our mistakes. Look upon this text as knowledge, pure and simple. Knowledge never kills or destroys, except in the hands of those who misuse it. Ooh. You close the book and replace it. Ooh, we have resurrection. Nifty. Yeah, I'm not going to cast that. Let's take the robe. Your fingers touch the black material of the robe. It feels inexplicably cold. The frost runs up your arm, and soon your whole body begins to shiver. The rocks of the cave seem to take on a life of all their own. They whirl and twist and become something entirely new, totally new. You realize that you are seeing a vision of an entirely different place. Nothing happens for a while. Then you realize that the visions have ended, and that you are looking at the same scene only thousands of years later. The robe lies in the same place, covering the ashy remains of an old wizard. Tentatively, you pick up the robe, but no further images haunt you. I have a new spell. Which spell is that? Self-immolation. I don't know what that does, but I'm not going to bother messing with it. Let's wear the robe. You slip the black robe over your body. Although the back is rather torn, from the front you cut an imposing figure. The cave is much larger than it appears from the outside, but is crammed full of sergeant refugees. The dog happily runs up to you. You run up to Balthazar, eager to discuss the amazing vision you just experienced. I just had an incredible vision. A vision? Tell me about it. You quickly recount the vision to Balthazar, who listens rapidly. This is amazing. You just experienced the life of our first dynast, Clytus I. It answers quite a few questions I've had about his rise to power and his reign. It also answers many questions about the current situation. Well, how did this happen? I'm not exactly sure. It's possible that when Clytus took his own life, the robe became infused with his spirit. This happens sometimes, especially when the death is particularly violent, and the victim is very powerful magic. When you picked up the robe, what was left of Clytus, lying there for thousands of years, passed through you. Your mind interpreted this by showing his memories. This is all speculation, you realize. I would be happy to. What would like to know? Wasn't there ruling at the council at the time? The High Council once governed all of Abarrach. Clytus was a member. It democratically created laws for all Sartan, and at one time the Mensch as well. When the Mensch woke the Sartan, the council was the body that decided on the course of action, to put a handful of the Mensch to sleep and wait for the interconnection. The council would have continued to rule if Cleitus had not been so power-hungry. He didn't have the political power to do that. No one did. So he required magical power to back his play. He made himself undefeatable with the scepter. No one dared oppose him after he created it. It was child's play to institute the monarchy. He merely eliminated every possible opponent. Why? I believe that to be a member of the Abarrach's council, the only requisite was a mastery of magic. This implied intelligence, but not necessarily sanity. Cleitus was clearly insane, if not before his play for power, then afterward. What happened to the Colossus? The Colossus is the source of Abarrach's magic. It is what warms the stone, melts the ice, and feeds water throughout the world. It was an unparalleled marvel, by far the greatest of the ancients' achievements. It contains so much power that it's easy to see why Cleitus lusted after it. What was the rune that he was battling with? It was a containment rune. The spell was a cap for the Colossus' magic. It sealed the spells inside to keep the magic from flowing out, so that the Colossus would last forever. What happened? Over a period of several months, Cleitus wove an intricate set of spells that temporarily weakened the containment rune. When the structure had drained the rune of enough power, he had his dwarf servant carve a chunk of the rune away. It was a central line of the rune. Without it, the symbol was meaningless, and therefore powerless. The Colossus' magic began to drain away. Why did he do it? It was much like taking a chunk of flesh from your body. The magic sealed inside of the Colossus started to leak out, like blood from a vital wound. It's true that eventually the Colossus would lose enough power to cease supporting Abarrach. I'm sure Cleitus must have known this. It's possible that Cleitus was counting on the interconnection. He must have reasoned that thousands of years would pass before it would actually make a difference. Long before that, the interconnection would occur, and Abarrach would survive on the energies provided from it. On that, I'm a little unclear as well. The interconnection is a little mystical to me, but it's obvious that ancients believed in it. Perhaps they shouldn't have. The thousands of years have passed, and no interconnection has taken place. The Colossus is failing and has taken our world with it. Cleitus was intelligent. He knew that people would see the Colossus with a huge chunk missing from the containment rune and realize something was amiss. So he placed an illusion upon it. Now the Colossus looks normal, even feels normal, but the hole is still there, the rune is still broken, and magic continues to flow. Can it be fixed? That's an interesting question. I suppose it could. If the rune were reconnected, it would begin to function again. The spell would hold in the magic as it's supposed to. I don't know if the Colossus has enough magic left at this point to support Abarrach anymore, but at least it wouldn't lose anymore. The original fragment, if it were replaced, would do this. Actually, it wouldn't have to be the original fragment. Anything that had the missing line that fits the hole would reconnect the rune. The complete rune is the important element, not the composition of the rock. If something with the fragment's shape were placed inside the hole, the containment rune would reactivate. Yeah, what's the deal with the dwarf? The dwarf was Cleitus' personal servant. He worshipped Cleitus, very like a well-trained dog. I believe that's how Cleitus saw him as well, not much like an animal. Why'd he bring him along? Cleitus needed someone else to break the rune. It required all of his concentration and effort merely to subdue it. While he focused on weakening the rune, he had the dwarf run in and carve out the chunk. What did he do? He just waited to be of service. Every day he walked with Cleitus through the catacombs to the Colossus and waited. If you count the amount of times he wandered in and out of the catacombs with nothing to do, that dwarf must have known it like the back of his hand. You couldn't get much more dedicated. What happened to him? Even weakened, the rune's magic was strong. Cleitus should have known better than to send a Minch to cut the rune. It killed him instantly. I believe that this is where Cleitus finally went mad. He was so close to his goal, and his plans were about to be foiled by a lowly Minch. In desperation, he resurrected the dwarf, knowing that the result would be much more resistant to damage than the dwarf's original body. The corpse dragged himself up, and still loyal to Cleitus, removed the chunk of stone from the containment rune. Cleitus had succeeded in breaking the rune at only the cost of a Minch, a bargain. That was probably when he did the necromancy. Come to think of it, you're right. Coincidental timing? Perhaps not. It's possible that he instituted the practice to justify his own actions. That's almost unthinkable. We've been using necromancy for thousands of years to cover for one man's mistake. I certainly hope that's not the case. Where did he end up? After Cleitus had broken the containment rune, he had no further use of his servant. He banished him to the ancestral home of the dwarves. It's a complex of caves fairly near Telestia, The dwarf obsessed about Cletus for years. Having the mental retention of the dead, he eventually forgot that he had completed the mission and broken the rune, so he sat in his cave waiting for Cletus to come and take him back to the catacombs. I think he's been waiting there ever since. What about the scepter? Oh my god. After Cletus took the trunk from the Colossus, he fashioned a scepter and used the trunk as a headpiece. He brandished the finished product at the council and demanded a crown. They caved in almost immediately. What kind of power does it have? Mostly destructive. It could turn a man to ash with no more than a flick of the wrist. I believe it also had powers of a more subtle nature, though my texts don't address these. What is written is that the scepter is unmatched in sheer destructive force. I don't really care where it gets its power. Why did they cave? Cletus was drawing upon the magic of the Colossus. Nothing could withstand that. Where the other wizards had to weave their own constructs slowly in the air and pull the possibilities of their spells into this reality, Cletus could just disintegrate them with a wave of his hand. Before any organized resistance could be brought to bear, Cletus had eliminated any council member powerful or stubborn enough to oppose him. The others fell into line like cattle. Is there any way to counter it? That's like asking if there's any way to defeat the Colossus. In a sense, it is the same thing. The scepter draws upon the Colossus' power. It cannot be overcome. Balthasar looks thoughtful and then continues. Although it wouldn't be necessary to overcome the scepter if it were rendered useless. This is just a wild thought, but the scepter focuses the power of the Colossus that is leaking from the broken containment rune. If the rune were completed and the containment spell resumed working, the scepter couldn't draw upon the magic. It would be useless. All of this speculation is worthless as well. You can't render the scepter useless without completing the containment rune, you can't complete the rune without replacing the headpiece inside the Colossus, and you can't get the headpiece without rendering the scepter useless. A vicious circle. Where's the scepter now? When Cletus grew too old to rule, he placed the scepter in the hands of his eldest son, Cletus II, and disappeared. The line has continued unbroken until this day. Cletus XIV now holds the scepter and rules Abarrach. I would guess that he has it within his palace. Can you explain why Cletus ran away at the end? I have a theory. After he passed the scepter on to his son, it was only a matter of time until he passed away, either naturally or at the hands of one of his many enemies. He decided to come here, to a secret cave where he could hide forever. Cletus entered and decided upon a small chamber for his final resting place. He cast an illusion spell upon the entrance in order to keep everyone out. Even if someone found these caverns, they wouldn't penetrate his inner sanctum. He had reasons to want not to be discovered. At the very end, he cast a self-immolation spell. This is surprising, but not totally unexplainable. I believe that Cletus actually feared resurrection more than death itself. By destroying his remains, even before he was dead, he assured himself that he would never be raised. That's why you found a pile of ashes inside his robes, which were fairly intact. The self-immolation spell destroys the body of the caster, but nothing else. It appears that Cletus wanted to minimize the chances of anyone finding and raising him, but even so, his actions seem extreme. His remains were completely